The sun rose over Santa Monica the next morning, warm and gold. Jack was the first one up, quietly making a batch of blueberry muffins. The scent of baking bread and fruit filled the air, a domestic perfume that seemed to anchor the apartment. Janet emerged from her room, looking sleepy and beautiful. She walked over to the counter and leaned against him. "Is it muffin day?" "It's whatever you want day," Jack said, kissing her forehead. "I want it to stay like this," she whispered. "No more lies. No more Three's Company secrets. Just us." Jack looked around the apartment at the wicker furniture, the pastel walls, and the jar of wildflowers on the table. He thought of the cowboy hat in the back of the closet and the Spanish textbook in the trash. He thought of Ralph's lime green suit and Cindy's plastic trophy. It wasn't a perfect life, and they weren't perfect people. They were messy, clumsy, and prone to making the most ridiculous mistakes. But they were together, and they were honest. And in the golden light of a 1970s California morning, that was more than enough. Chapter 25. The Neon. Midnight of 1980. The clock on the wall of the Regal Beagle ticked toward 12, but the energy inside was different than in years past. The shimmering disco balls still spun, but the music was shifting. New wave synths were beginning to compete with the heavy funk of the 70s. It was New Year's Eve, 1979, and the air was thick with the scent of cheap champagne and a new decade. Jack, Janet, and Cindy stood at their usual table, surrounded by streamers. Furley was sporting a tuxedo that looked like it had survived a glitter factory explosion. 10, 9, 8, the crowd roared. Jack grabbed Janet's hand, pulling her close. He could feel her heart beating against his chest. 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year. As the balloons fell, Jack didn't look at the clock. He looked at Janet. In the strobing light of the Beagle, she looked like everything he had ever wanted. He kissed her, not just to ring in the year, but to anchor himself in the reality they had built. "Happy 1980, Janet," he whispered as they pulled apart. "Happy 1980. Cowboy," she teased, using the old nickname. The 80s had arrived, and with them came a new set of rules. The Three's Company era was transitioning into something more permanent. Cindy was talking about moving to a new apartment in Beverly Hills to be closer to her secretarial agency, and the dynamic of apartment 201 was shifting from a survival pact to a romantic sanctuary. Chapter 26. The proposal in the souffle. Jack had been planning it for months. He had saved every extra dollar from his sous chef bonuses, and he had finally found the ring, a modest, elegant sapphire that reminded him of the Santa Monica Sea. He decided to do it on Valentine's Day. He would cook a 5-course meal at the apartment, ending with a chocolate soufflé. He would hide the ring inside the soufflé. It was a classic, foolproof plan, except it was Jack Tripper. The dinner went beautifully. The candlelight was perfect. The music was soft, and Janet looked radiant. But as Jack brought out the soufflé, he tripped over the corner of the rug, the same rug that had been the bane of his existence for years. The soufflé flew through the air, landing directly in Janet's lap. "Jack!" she screamed, jumping up as the hot chocolate pooled on her silk dress. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Jack scrambled to help her, but in the chaos, the ring dislodged from the dessert began to roll across the floor toward the heating vent. "The ring! Janet, get the ring!" Jack lunged for the small, shining object. Janet froze, looking at the ring, then at Jack, who was now flat on his face near the vent, clutching a sapphire and covered in chocolate. "A ring?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack sat up, his hair disheveled, a smear of cocoa on his cheek. He held the ring out, his hand shaking. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I wanted it to be unsurpassed. I wanted to be suave. I wanted to be anyone but me." Janet knelt down in the chocolate-stained rug, her eyes filling with tears. "But I don't want anyone but you, Jack. I never did." "Janet would," Jack said, his voice cracking. "Will you marry me? Will you spend the rest of your life watching me trip over rugs and spill things on your dresses?" "Yes," she whispered, throwing her arms around him. 1,000 times, yes. They sat on the floor, surrounded by ruined chocolate and spilled wine, and for the first time in their lives, the fumble didn't matter. They were engaged. Chapter 27. The Florist's Ambition. With a wedding to plan, Janet felt a new surge of ambition. Working at the mall florist was stable, but she wanted more. She wanted a shop of her own, a place called Wood and Petals, where she could curate the arrangements and bring the beauty of the California coast into the city. "It's a huge risk, Jack," she said one evening, looking over a business proposal on the kitchen table. "Interest rates are high, and we have a wedding to pay for." "I've got the bistro job, Janet," Jack reminded her, leaning over her shoulder. "And Maurice is talking about letting me buy into the partnership. We can do this. We've survived Bart Furley and David Vance. We can survive a small business loan." Janet looked at him, seeing the man he had become. He wasn't the clumsy student anymore. He was a partner, a pillar. They found a small storefront on Main Street, a former apothecary with high ceilings and large windows that caught the morning light. They spent their weekends stripping wallpaper and painting the walls a soft, sage green. Cindy helped with the bookkeeping, and Larry managed to find a delivery van that only broke down once every 3 days. The opening of Wood and Petals was a quiet success. There were no neon signs or disco balls, just the scent of fresh roses and the sight of Janet Wood behind the counter, finally owning her own piece of the world. Chapter 28. A Texan in Santa Monica. The wedding was set for June. Invitations were sent to Des Moines and the Tripper family in San Diego. But 2 weeks before the big day, there was a knock at the door. Jack opened it to find a man standing there. He wore a real Stetson hat, real boots, and a denim jacket that looked like it had seen 100 dust storms. He had a mole on his cheek, a real one. "Can I help you?" Jack asked. "I'm looking for Jack Tripper," the man said in a slow, deep drawl. "My brother told me this was the place." Jack frozen. "Your brother?" "Yeah. Austin." Jack felt the blood drain from his face. "Austin? You mean you're the real Austin?" "Name's Tex," the man said, grinning. "Austin's my middle name. I'm Jack's cousin from Abilene. Heard there was a wedding, and I figured I'd come see if my little cousin finally learned how to handle a lady." Tex Tripper was everything Jack had pretended to be. He was rugged, quiet, and possessed a natural authority that made Mr. Furley cower in respect. "See, Janet," Jack whispered that night. "I wasn't lying. There is a cowboy in the family." "I still prefer my version," Janet laughed, kissing him. Tex stayed in the guest room, which was now a storage room for Janet's flowers, and for a week the apartment felt like a ranch. He helped Ralph fix the plumbing with a piece of wire and a pocket knife, and he even managed to teach Larry properly tip a hat. Chapter 29. The Altar of Truth. The wedding day arrived under a clear, blue California sky. They chose a small chapel overlooking the Pacific, the same sea that had witnessed their journey from the very beginning. Jack stood at the altar, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was wearing a tuxedo that actually fit, and for once, he hadn't tripped over anything all morning. Larry stood next to him as best man, looking surprisingly respectable in a three-piece suit. The music started not a disco beat, but a soft, classical melody played on a guitar. Janet appeared at the back of the chapel, walking on her father's arm. She wore a simple, white lace dress, and in her hands she carried a bouquet of wildflowers, the same kind Jack had picked for her on the morning after the truth came out. As she reached the altar, Roland Wood took Jack's hand and placed Janet's in it. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes was one of hard-won respect. "We are gathered here today," the minister began. Jack didn't hear much of the ceremony. He was too busy looking at Janet. He saw the girl who had taken a chance on a clumsy cook. He saw the woman who had stood by him when the world felt like it was falling apart. "I, Jack Tripper, take thee, Janet Wood. I, Janet Wood, take thee, Jack Tripper." When the minister finally said, "You may kiss the bride," Jack didn't fumble. He didn't stumble. He took her in his arms and kissed her with a certainty that echoed through the chapel. The reception was held at the bistro. Maurice had outdone himself with a menu of Spanish-Californian fusion, and the wine was unsurpassed. Ralph Furley gave a toast that involved a 5-minute story about a landlord's convention in 1965, but it ended with a tearful, "You kids are the heart of this building." As the sun began to set over the pier, Jack and Janet stood on the deck of the restaurant, watching the lights begin to twinkle. "We did it," Janet whispered, leaning her head on his shoulder. "No more roommates?" Jack teased. "Just one," she said. "For life." Chapter 30. The Ledger of Life. The first year of marriage in the early 80s was a whirlwind of early mornings and late-night ledgers. The apartment was no longer the chaotic hub of three singles. It was the quiet sanctuary of two professionals trying to build an empire. Jack was now the executive chef at the bistro, and Janet's shop, Wood and Petals, was becoming the go-to florist for the Santa Monica socialite scene.